Hello and welcome to the Choralosophy Podcast. I'm Chris Muntz, the host, and this is episode 29, part 3 of the podcast mini-series for February, Choral Music, a Human Art Form. I have on the show today Jazz Rucker, who is the Equity Chair for the Missouri Music Educators Association and is a friend from my local area here outside of Kansas City. And so I've got him in my actual physical space recording an interview today, which is a new thing for this show. I've been wanting to do this for a long time, is to have a person physically present for a conversation face-to-face without the internet involved, which was a lot of fun. And so I've got a conversation here for you that I think went even deeper than I anticipated that it would go. And so I'm excited for you to listen to this conversation about equity in the context of education and in the choral world, although we did stay very broad in our conversation of the discussions of equity related to justice. In the previous episodes on this series, we have been focused more on inclusion and representation, which are all really important aspects that we seek every day in our rehearsals and we seek in our classrooms. But equity has a different spin and is a term you're probably going to hear in your school districts if you don't already hear that very soon. And it's a very trendy buzzword. And so Jazz, having the experience recently of diving into that at our state level in our NAFME or NAME organization, he's going to give us some insight into what he's learned on his journey towards equity. If you have sheet music needs, as second semester fires back up and as you're approaching your contest season, or even if you're just planning ahead for next year or for an end-of-the-year concert, I've got two awesome friends on board with the show that you can go to and search online and have the music ready to print from your printer within seconds and not have to wait for shipping and not have to wait for a vendor to reply. You can just go right to ryanmain.com and check out some of his independently published music, which is becoming more and more popular. I'm seeing it being performed all over the country, and his stuff is so great, and you should check it out. And he does something really cool with his purchases too, where once you buy that PDF, you own it and forever, and you can make as many copies as you want forever. He doesn't make you count the copies, which is really cool. So you get that, you save the PDF, you don't have to store anything in your music library, you just store it on your computer, and then 3 years from now, when you want to do it again, you just print more because you own that copy license. So that's a really cool thing. Plus, you can enter Choralosophy at checkout, get 10% off. Then you can head over to graphitepublishing.com, and you can scroll through a whole bunch of composers over there, many that you know. So Eric Barnum, Tim Takash, Jocelyn Hagan, Joshua Shank, all kinds of stuff by many, many great composers are on there. And what I love about Graphite is their search engine to sort all their different music. So if you're looking for choirs of multiple levels, of multiple voicings, you can enter all those categories into their search engine and it will churn out everything that's on their site that meets that criteria. So strongly encourage you to use those two sources, ryanmain.com, graphitepublishing.com. Support those awesome mom and pop businesses and send them your attention. And then when you check out, you enter Choralosophy at checkout, you get a discount, and then they know that you're listening to this show. It helps a lot. So head over there and check out those sites. Well, I'm here with Jazz Rucker. Jazz in my actual house, which is something relatively new for the podcast. In fact, Jazz, you will be the first episode broadcast from this room ever. So I'm excited. I've been wanting to do that for a while, letting the audience kind of see the other half of the room because they're always being pointed back towards that side, which is really cool. So welcome, and thanks for being part of this February series that I'm doing called Choral Music, a Human Art Form. We've been diving into ways that as a choral profession, we can truly make our art form and our classrooms a place that is welcome and open to all humans. And one of the things that we have talked about quite a bit so far are some other terms in this related to this topic, which are things like representation and inclusion, but we haven't really hit equity yet. And so today, Jazz is here to help us talk about equity. So welcome.
Thank you.
One of the reasons that I asked you to do this is I came across some info I just hadn't noticed until our recent Missouri Music Educators Convention. I noticed that you were the equity chair. Is that correct? Is that the title?
Yep.
So I thought, and Jazz is here in Kansas City in Lee Summit, a friend from the school district, and what better person to talk about this, because I think it's an important aspect or third side of a coin, which I know coins don't have three sides, but of some of the terms that we've been throwing around on this show in February. So in your mind, what is your job as the equity chair first? Let's start there.
Yeah. So the position as the equity chair was created just kind of out of what was happening nationally with NAFME, with the National Music Education Organization. And then our president at that time decided that Missouri needed to kind of be getting ahead of the curve as far as, instead of being asked to require to have a position, he's like, we're going to create one, we're going to dive ourselves into this work and then kind of feel like, is this where we're supposed to go? Is this how it's supposed to look? And so really the kind of the purpose of the job is just begin to look at sort of the systemic structure of MMEA. That was my first charge. He's like, just look at what we do and begin to ask questions. And so I was kind of got to be a pest, really, and just kind of asking questions of, well, why is it only for these people to audition for a certain aspect? Or why do we have this many choirs versus this many bands versus this many orchestras versus this many general music sessions? Like, why are all these things the way they are? And sort of begin to peel back the layers of the system and kind of look at it like that. And then for me, my job that went out to the people, to our colleagues, was basically looking at the research with equity and how it can tie to what we do with music education. Mm-hmm. And then what does that look like for us, both in the classroom every single day, and then how can we really look at a bigger picture of what we're doing with music education. And so have I done that job? I've barely started to weave some of these pieces into the fabric of who I am, let alone be effective with getting that information out towards others. And so really, in my article writing, which happens quarterly, I pose way more questions than I do saying, this is how we should do things, because I don't feel as if, even myself, I'm on this journey, I've agreed to go. I don't know that I've arrived. I don't know that there'll ever be an arrival point. But it's just as we continue to navigate our way through this equity work, and how do we begin to sort of weave that into the fabric of what we already are.
Right. So you are the first equity chair for MMEA, for Missouri Music. Mm-hmm. Okay, I didn't realize that either. All right. So we're going to get deeper into that in a little bit, but why don't you first tell the listeners, the audience, a little bit more about you, your background, where you come from, where you're headed, so we get some frame of reference for you.
So I'm from Moberly, Missouri, which is just a small town north of Columbia. Grew up there with my family in a rural area. I didn't necessarily know what that meant growing up until I went to Mizzou, and then when you go to college, you begin to learn labels about things in your past or in your life, where you begin to add education to your existence. And so I was like, okay, yeah. I mean, people rode horses to school every now and then. And so I was like, okay, there's some culture that I grew up in rural, and also I grew up as just I think I was one of 8 people of color in my graduating class of around just under 200. And so I didn't necessarily know that other places were different from that either, that there was a higher concentration of people of color in different areas. And so I went to Mizzou, got my degree in music education there with Dr. Crabb. Ms. Ann Harrell was my voice teacher. Dr. Wendy Sims, our education advisor there. Spent some time with Dr. Major as well before she moved to Pennsylvania. And then straight from Mizzou, got into the Columbia Public Schools system. Worked 6th and 7th graders my first 2 years at Lang Middle School, which was then the realization, because I learned that Lang Middle School was really close to being a minority majority school, where most of the kids and students did look like me. And so that was a complete different experience from my upbringing, which was just a unique way to get started in my career. Also a Title I school, high poverty and need there as far as financial basis goes. And then I got the opportunity to open up a brand new high school in Columbia, Battle High School. So that community at Lang Middle School, along with another middle level building, fed in together to create the population for Battle High School. So I got to follow students from their 6th grade year, my first year teaching, all the way through their 12th grade year. And actually, it was that class I graduated with from Battle High School that I started with my first year there, that I ended up moving to Lee Summit afterwards. So
Okay.
I followed them all the way through and kind of graduated with, and I got to apologize and sort of recreate some things after that first year of teaching. And then moved to Lee Summit, where I kind of was seeking a stronger balance between family and home life. I started my career as a single dude, and then got married. We had 2 kids. I missed really the first half of one of our child's lives, and I was like, I can't do this again. And so then kind of sought a different path. And so now I'm almost through with my second year at Lee Summit North here in Lee Summit. And I've decided next year to take an elementary music position at an elementary kind of just a couple miles away from North, still on the same side of town. Mm-hmm. And I'm really excited to pursue the opportunity of growing in a different way completely when it comes to teaching general music there.
Yeah, well, congratulations on that. That's all awesome. Voce Vista Video is blowing my mind every single time I use it. I'm still about 2 years or so in the classroom of using this product. It's something I use about monthly, sometimes not even every month, but every bi-monthly, but I use it pretty regularly in my voice studio, and I'll throw it up on the screen in choir rehearsals, and it allows us as a choir to see the entire overtone spectrum that we are creating when we sing. It shows even if the vowel is not the right shape, not the right resonance, the overtones change, and kids can see it. So they can see immediately that they're not singing a pure O anymore. They can see that they're not singing a pure E. Or if the basses are singing a pitch and the tenors join an octave above, they can see immediately that it was skewed up above the pitch or below the pitch. They can see exactly where it is. And for our visual learners and our differentiated learning, that's huge. So check that out. Go to vocevista.com/choralosophy. And then you can try it for free for 30 days. And then once the trial's up, you can put in the code and purchase that and get the discount. Also, we have sitereadingfactory.com, where if you are not on that yet this school year, first of all, you're way behind. I'm not trying to shame you, but get on there. Sitereadingfactory.com is $35 a year for your membership. And then just for a couple bucks a kid, you can add a student membership for each kid, and it's hugely beneficial. You can get the full package, everything that you get if you use your Choralosophy discount code. That'll work there as well. But it's not too late. That's the thing. You can start this stuff with literacy skills with your kids, and you don't need to go buy a How to Teach Literacy textbook. You really don't. You have everything that you need right there. Go listen to episode 18 on this show, where I kind of outline the process. And if you have questions, shoot me an email, but it is not too late. You can start in January. You can start in February. So head to sitereadingfactory.com and grab yourself a membership. So one of the parts of your story that you just told sparked a curiosity. And so you mentioned growing up in a very small, rural, Midwestern town that was almost all white, and then going to teach in a place where, it's definitely way more diverse. Would you say, you said almost minority majority? Does that mean so maybe like half?
45% African-American, Black, people of color versus, the 2% that I came from.
Right. Yeah. So my curiosity is, when you started encountering the culture that those students walk through every day, mm-hmm. was there any culture shock for you what's it like to be Black when there's other Black people around?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I don't think, to plainly answer the question, I don't know. I don't think was a shock for me.
Okay.
It was just it was a misplacement of culture as far as location goes. So like my family is huge, and when we hung out with, I went to church with all Black people. Like it was a smaller church, but we called it the Second Baptist Church, but people dubbed it Rucker Baptist because it was like it was all just Ruckers that just worshipped and were leading that church together. And then when I had to go on family vacations or when I visit like Friday night fish fries, I was always in cultures around family mm-hmm. that were people that looked like me. But when I came to school, that was not the expectation. And so now that culture of being around people of color, people that looked like me, that was in a fish fry culture or a holiday culture or just a more relaxed culture, was now in a place of academia. And so that, I don't know if that was a shock to me. It was just like, so now it feels like home, but it's now in the place that never really felt like home within a school.
Right. So it's like you have to go through there's Black people in schools
right,
too.
Like Black people do school all together at the same.
Yeah. That was a curiosity for me, just because the most recent episode that the audience would have heard, I was talking with Maria Ellis about, her being, she was raised in an almost all black community in St. Louis, and having that, her perspective being of looking out from that close knit group into a broader world of music and choral music and all of that. So it's almost like it made me wonder too. I've been thinking a lot about that. Just what people's brains go through when they are minorities within minorities, almost. Even taking it outside of the racial context. My wife was raised in a small town in Idaho where almost all of her friends in her high school are Mormon. So she was one of very few, probably like 85% of the high school population are Mormon. So you can be a religious minority and start to develop defense mechanisms, and maybe even certain places, like you mentioned, school might not feel like home because everyone else has a different culture, that kind of thing. That's interesting. One of the things that I think would be good to kind of establish right off the bat as we dive into some of the equity discussion is, what in your mind is equity, and do you hear the term misused at all? Because I feel like I do. I just wonder.
So it's a big question to talk about what is equity, and I think everyone, just with every other issue in the world, it's like everyone has a different flavor or thought about what it could be. I think and I've also just recently had my thinking challenged on what equity is, and I think it's healthy for me to grow in this way. But I always would think of the image of, you see the three individuals at an event of some sort, and there's a fence or a gate in front of them, and you have, they're at different heights, and then so that's what's called, injustice or inequity, or a lack of support for those individuals because one person can see the event and the other two people can't because of their height. And then you see the next image of equity is giving the person that's in the center 2 boxes so they can stand and see, and the other person 3 boxes so they can stand and see. And so people see that as equity, and I mean that's my first thought, and I'm like, okay, it's just giving people what they need, or providing the supports needed so that they can have a space at the table. It's not taking that space away from anybody else at the table. The person that's the tallest can still see the game, but now the other 2 people have what they need to be able to see whatever this event, game, whatever it is on the other side of this fence.
And not everyone needs the same size box.
Right. We don't.
Right.
And so what's challenged my thinking is those 2 images standing next to one another. But the third image with a label of justice is the fence just not being there at all. And so that kind of has struck me in a different way of, not why is the barrier there? Like why is there a need for that barrier to exist? And then let's start talking about the barrier instead of talking about who has and has not to get over that barrier. And so that notion of that maintain status of justice versus injustice, I think equity is a way to bridge those 2 gaps. And so equity, I think, is the work in progress of getting us from injustice to justice, if I could bottle it up in a sentence.
Yeah, so I've seen that image before too. So I've got a challenge for you on it too. I see that image very differently. Mostly, I get the purpose of that image, and I think what it does is it paints a very, very simplistic picture of what equity is.
Yep.
I think my biggest beef with it is that it's way too oversimplified. If you're so, for example, you mentioned being challenged by saying, what if the fence doesn't exist? I would take it one step further and say, what if the game didn't exist? Or what if the needs of each kid, that we're assuming that the need of each of those 3 kids, and it's an oversimplification because we're dealing in education with many, many hundreds and thousands of kids across the country. But what if one of the kids didn't need to see the game at all? What if they needed to see something else?
Right.
What if one of the kids needed to see the game for just a few minutes and then walk over and get some popcorn? So my point is that,
what if they didn't need a box?
What if they don't need a box at all? Or what if they would rather stare at the other kid's shoes? So there are some assumptions, and we can get into this later too. But we're in education. we do, in an effort to achieve justice, I feel like sometimes there is still the goal of trying to put round pegs in round holes when oftentimes the hole is square, in an effort, I think, which is a good effort to try to make things equitable. Sometimes we might be giving kids something that they don't need towards an end that they don't really want. But again, I think that for me, I think that's really where my beef with the term equity comes, is just because it doesn't. I feel like it looks to the next step, but not beyond.
Right.
Sometimes,
Right.
And I think maybe that's kind of what you're talking about with the next step, like of getting to a justice level, which maybe that's kind of the next part of the conversation.
Yeah.
So what are some things that have you ever come across somebody who uses the term equity in a way that you just feel like that's not what that means?
I think it's
so what is it
oftentimes used in the same line as equality, of like just giving everyone the same thing. And then to go even further, and this is where people start to have their feelings hurt or their toes stepped on, is it's like, well, I see everyone the same, or I'm colorblind and I don't. So it's like, I just do what's equal. And so that's providing equity. And I think the first thing we have to charge ourselves with is, if you see everyone as equal, then you never see me for who I am. And so you're casting aside and washing out all the things that make Jazz Rucker unique. Like, I am Black, I am a Christian, I am a heterosexual, I am a husband, I am a father. And not everyone are those things, or not everyone identifies with those things. And so if you say that you're colorblind and you don't see any of that, then there are pieces of me that you're casting aside and never entering into a relationship with.
Right.
And I think that is I think that to me, and Zaretta Hammond sort of focuses on this work when she talks about the 3 dimensions of equity, and Cornelius Minor engages in it when he talks about providing justice and equity in education, is that we really have to start with that one-on-one, that person-to-person, that identity factor, before we can get to, like, now how can we make sure we get from knowing each other as who we are and engaging in those authentic relationships to providing what is needed for everyone's voice to be honored in a way that is essential to who they are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's something I feel like is something on my thought process all the time too, is that you can't, and I think sometimes the people who do equity work and who have these conversations sometimes are also guilty of, on the other side, is putting people as definable by their groups. When in reality, I've actually had these conversations a little bit on the show, but also a lot in real life. It's maybe controversial, but I feel pretty confident saying that, for example, there's no such thing as white culture. There are several. There are dozens of white cultures. There's no such thing as the Black experience.
Right.
Because there is not.
There's mine.
Right. There's Jazz's. Yeah. Right. And I think that we do ourselves a disservice to not appreciate that you are Black and Christian and a husband and a father and all the things you listed, because those are all who make you you. But I think sometimes we can focus too much on the skin color, and let that be the defining characteristic.
Right.
Which and partly because, again, I think it's well intentioned. I think people look at the work of trying to create an education system in this country anyway that is accessible and open and providing great outcomes for all of its constituents. But we've started at the group level and tried to go down, where my personal opinion is we should be starting at the individual level and then looking at how that affects the groups. Does that crazy?
So no, I don't think you're crazy at all. I think that's the first step over the barrier, is saying, like, I want to look at you for who you are, and learning from that person, and like engaging in that relationship one-on-one, that's not how schools are set up necessarily, if we're going to talk about just education specifically, and especially not an ensemble. That's not the inherent setup, but it is something that we have to just figure out, how do we redefine what we do to get us to a space to where we can see individuals. And I think starting at that level, as you talked about, instead of grouping, that's a powerful way to engage in the work.
Right. Yeah, I remember the first time in a faculty meeting I came across this problem was probably, for me to wrap my head around it was in our district. I'm thinking this must have been 8 years ago. So it was before we were officially doing equity-related stuff in our district, which is a term that it wasn't really used 8 years ago. It's all relatively new in terms of education. But we were asked to do an activity where we were asked to go through our rosters of students and identify the underserved students. And one of the criteria, of course, was skin color, to put kids into columns of which ones we felt were underserved. The problem with the way that it was defined in our instructions was that it was not a combination of factors. It was a skin color would put you in that box regardless. Okay. And then there were other things that if you check the box, then that student might also free and reduced lunch or whatever. And so because I've always been, for 15 years or so, philosophically an individualist, my radar started just pinging as, okay, I've got these two black boys in my chamber choir right now whose parents make more money than I do, who have 4.2s, look like Denzel, varsity sport athletes, will go to college on full rides, and have access to everything our school has to offer. And then I've also got some white kids who will not make this list, who have a much lower chance in life right now. And so what I immediately started thinking of is that doesn't mean that I think that there is nothing important about those boys being black, but in my mind as an individualist, I'm thinking that has to be just one of the many things we look at about what their experience is, because in a lot of ways, those are two kids that are very well served by our school just by any objective measurement or whatever. And then there are some other kids that maybe need a lot of attention and need a lot of work. So, and I also happened to have a conversation with these guys later about, and I was just asking them what they thought about, so as they're getting ready to graduate, what they thought about that. And they both felt kind of offended that because they were black, automatically they went on some list of like kids that aren't going to have a great experience or whatever. Right. It's like, what does that say about me? That was kind of their whatever. So I don't know. What's your reaction to that story?
So I've got several thoughts. First, I think you talked about fitting the round peg in the square hole. And so we see that there are issues. A lot of them stem from racial divide or economic divide. And so let's just gather all the names and then we'll tackle the issues that way. And I think we didn't go far back enough in that specific scenario to talk about individuals as individuals. But then also my other thought is there's some multicultural education that's missing from the conversation as well, and it may be even on behalf of those two black kids that you were mentioning, because I'm sure there are things in their families that their parents have taught them, or maybe I'm assuming, but I'm going to go there right now, that they've taught them of how to function in a society that doesn't necessarily look like them.
Right.
And so for them to capitalize on their life experience, they've had to do things that maybe people that don't look like them didn't necessarily have to do. For example, growing up, when we walked into a mall or a department store, like I always knew that even though it was cold, and I may still be cold coming from the wintry outside during the holiday season, my hands were always to come out of my pockets and always be in plain vision. And I spent a lifetime of being followed around in a mall, and I've never stolen anything. But there's that concept that, you know, here's a big black dude. He's wearing puffy gear. He's got a coat on. He may fit something into his pockets and steal from us. And that. Right. And so I think there are some of those experiences, those microaggressions, or those little the multicultural education things that happen from a home taught standpoint that has undoubtedly helped them be as successful as they are, in addition to the economic advantages that they grew up in. And so I think I think if we're talking about providing some justice or some equity, those are some things to look at too. And so maybe that's where that prompt came from.
But would you want the school teaching your kids that?
I don't think I would want students being taught how to manage microaggressions through life. I think that should come from home.
That's kind of my point. Yeah.
And I don't know. But I also think there are several times in my first job of teaching people that look like me, there were some gaps in that I learned from my home, which was, I think, very privileged, to what I saw in the classroom, and there was a need to fit a gap there. I think if you continue on this path and the behavior looks this way, these are some of the results that could happen.
Right.
And there were some parents that thanked me for filling in those gaps for their children, of saying, hey, let's make sure when we go out in public, I'm just talking about on a field trip.
Yeah.
These are some of the behaviors that we're going to look for in order to ensure the safety of everyone on this trip.
Right.
Because we're coming as a big group of Black people into, the cafe court of a mall. We're going to have lunch. Some people are going to look at it as differently than if it were a bus coming from a different school of people that didn't look like us.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. I feel there's a third side to that coin, or maybe we should be looking at what that coin's made of and figuring out how we can change that piece in order that people are growing up in a world where we figure out how to neutralize all of these small triggers and issues. Right.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think that all makes sense. I think my initial reaction is that a couple things is that if, as a white educator, if I were to ever be put in the position of needing to deliver that information to a group of Black students, that would make me feel very uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. Because I think that same information, which is all good, that Black parents teach their kids and a Black teacher might very comfortably relay to a kid, coming from me would be very condescending.
Right.
And so if you've got, it's kind of and not to compare the experiences at all, but it's in a similar category of rhetoric. As a male teacher, feeling super comfortable of talking to a female about what she's wearing or whatever, there's a certain types of information that maybe in a public school setting is not the best place to deliver that information.
Right.
Which I kind of tend to lean probably more than most public school educators towards that. Applies to a lot of things that I don't think are our job.
Right.
But I understand what you're saying,
and I think that piece of the element of the discomfort of a person that the ethnic background may not match the student background is then the call for inclusion and for there to be more representation of people. And so our school demographic should look like our faculty demographic, should look like our leadership demographic, so that there is a sort of place of and I don't know if I want to use the word comfort, because I think people can use comfort as a safe hold of not engaging in disruption and discourse and new thinking.
Mm-hmm.
But whatever that word is, I can provide a space of inclusion to where there's a playing field where everyone has at least someone else on the field to go to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that would get into a larger conversation about the statistics on whether or not there are enough. For example, you've probably seen the memes in the Twitter trends about name your last Black male teacher,
mm-hmm.
all that stuff.
Yep.
Well, part of the reason for that is that statistically, very few Black men go into education,
right?
And so I think it wouldn't be as simple as just saying I guess lobbing a grenade at a school district saying you need to hire more Black male teachers.
Where are we?
From where?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Because any school can only hire from their applicant pool, and they've got to be able to find those applicants. So I think that makes it another next level conversation, which is how do we encourage more young Black boys to see themselves potentially as a future educator.
Mm-hmm.
And are there cultural things at play? Are there media image things at play? All kinds of things that.
Right. Why is there a turnoff for Black men to become educators?
Mm-hmm. Just jumping in really quickly to remind you that there are some very slick ways to interact with the Choralosophy podcast beyond just listening to it. You can join the Facebook page Choralosophers, which is a private Facebook group that allows you, while you're listening or after, to have that burning thought that comes up from a conversation that you're hearing, and you want to respond in some way, and you want to get other people's feedback on your response. Well, Choralosopher's Facebook page is a private and very safe way to do that, where you can respond. Hey, I heard this on episode whatever, and here's what I was thinking when I heard that. Just drop that on there and see what people think. I think you will find that that is a very open environment. Another way to do that, to interact with us on a deeper level, is on our Patreon page. The Choralosophy Patreon is patreon.com/Choralosophy, and for as little as $3 a month, you can get extra episodes where I talk about behind-the-scenes issues that are facing the show, as well as leaking out the guests ahead of time so that you can, if you want to, throw a question onto the episode for that guest. So I would encourage you to check out one or both of those options going forward. Now back to the interview with Jazz. So yeah, it's a very interesting, multifaceted conversation, and one of the reasons that I wanted to do a conversation like this about it is because I feel like when these types of issues, you mentioned earlier, people like getting their feelings hurt or having their toes stepped on, and I feel like the reason that happens is because a lot of the conversation happens online and it happens in blurs, where just the nature of that level of communication is that it has to be either this or this, and anywhere in between is incorrect. And so what that does is it tends to cause people, in my opinion, to err on the side of oversimplifying an issue, to where, if we just did equity training in the school district, it would solve this. And then on the other side, we've been dealing with that in our community the last few years. And then if somebody on the other side says, well, no, I don't think that's the right approach because we want to try this and this and this, well, then they're racist and they don't want to try, And so what the conversation needs is more nuance of talking about, like, okay, yeah, well, this part of equity work I think is really, really important. Maybe there's other things we could talk about with it too. I like this goal, but maybe we add this goal. But what that tends to do for people, I think, is because the conversations happen online so much, I think, is it puts us in, oh, well, that person sees it differently than I do. They're on the different team. They're not on my team on this, that kind of thing. And I think it just makes it harder to do the work.
Yep. It becomes an on or off society of like, they're with me or they're not with me. And like, I love what you said about there being that nuance, because there's so much gray space. Like we've got to get out of this. It's either this way or that way, because in between those two ways is a multitude of ways to sort of get to the same means. But then I also think to even dial back even further from that is, like, where are we going with this? Like, do you actually see a finished product? Do you see a finish line? Is there a line in the sand that when we cross it, we will say, here we are, we've made it? I don't yet maintain that that's the goal, that we're actually going to cross a line and say, all right, we've done it. Like, okay, put away all the books and research. Like, we're here, we've arrived. But I do just think engaging in the journey is something that we probably should consider. And there's lots of imagery that people, when we talk about equity as a whole, we talk about the iceberg of like just seeing the tip of the iceberg and then like getting below the surface, or we talk about stepping into the shallow end of the pool. And I think those images kind of help us understand, okay, well, I can stand here or want to stand here. But and I can't remember where this exactly comes from, but I think for me, this work is more, if we're going to use another image, is like fabric. Like, I'm fully made who I am just as I am. But I think we could all stand to have a little bit thicker thread count in our lives to be more enriched, and to then provide more enriching experiences for ourselves and others. And so if we can begin to weave in different experiences into our own fabric and increase our thread count, we're not asking you to not be you and to not be who you are, but we are asking you to add layers of education and thought and cultural experience and social justice and like culturally relevant practices to what we do in the classroom. And that's not That's not taking you away from you, but it's saying that this person can also be here with you, and this person can also be here with you, and why not this person too? And why not try that thing over there? Instead of just saying, nope, I'm good the way I am. I think we are born as we are, just as we are, but if we continue to stay there, then there's a level of ignorance that we have to continue to protect and guard in ourselves. And if we decide that, okay, it's time to go on this journey, then those levels of ignorances get combated by education, and so then we replace that ignorance with education as we begin to take step on this path.
Yeah. I think, so in fact, I said this probably on the very first episode of the show a year ago, was that one of the things that drives me crazy is when people use almost as a brag or a flex how unchanged they are over the last 15 years. Like my opinion on that is the same as it was 15. I'm like, you're bragging about that?
Yeah,
to
that's
me,
unfortunate.
Yeah, to me that, and I don't care what it's about. That just means that you maybe haven't reflected very much on whether or not that's correct, and what are your premises, and where do you get that information, and all that kind of stuff. Because the reality is, the world is so complicated that for us to be able to nail the correct answer on any complicated thing when we're 22 or whatever, and have it never be challenged ever again, is just so low. And so I think that's good. I wonder too if you were talking about the fabric image. I really like, because I think about the community that we're sitting in right now and that you've been working in for the last couple of years. And I don't know if you've heard me tell this story or not already, but I told this to my men's choir the other day. When I graduated from high school here in Lee Summit, my graduating class was 450 or so, relatively large class. I think there were 6 black kids. And it's dramatically more diverse now. And that has made I think the experience of building a culture in the school so much better. It's the higher thread count. There are more interactions, more conversations that can be had, topics that will come up that otherwise wouldn't have come up.
Right.
Okay. So I've seen that change in the 20 years that I've been at, around the high schools in this town, and seeing that change in real time. But one of the things that I thought was really funny, and I'm kind of embarrassed to tell this story, but it's a funny story, where I had a really good friend from back in my days of high school, a black man he's a boy then and a man now, that I saw on Facebook our class picture. Right, so you know how classes will get everybody together and do the big panoramic. And somebody posted the panoramic on Facebook, and I go through it, and picturing in my head now, 20 years later, what a graduating class in Lee Summit looks like. But then going back to the 1998 class picture or whatever, and looking, oh my goodness, I just never even noticed that there were 6 black kids.
Right.
And so I messaged one of them on Facebook. Did you know that there were only 6? He writes me back, "You're an idiot." Of course I knew. We talked about it all the time.
All the time. Yep.
But it was enlightening and just kind of eye-opening, because when I think this kind of goes back into the just kind of human psychology aspect of all of this, which is kind of the purpose of, at least my motivation for wanting to talk about this, is because I see that there are racial experiences in any culture that is a diverse racial culture. So the U.S. is a diverse racial culture by any measurable metric compared to most other places in the country or the world. So we have to deal with things that a lot of other countries, like if you're in Beijing, it's 98% Chinese. Right. They don't have to deal with a lot of the same conversations that we do, because they don't. I mean, they're still over there. Heard this story was being told by somebody at my school who went to Beijing on a field trip, where if there was a black person on that field trip, they will literally walk up to you and just touch your hair and just
what is this?
It's like they're in a museum exhibit.
Yep.
And so I think it's tempting for us to look at our racial baggage as a country as being something that is a badge of shame, as our history is. But we miss the opportunity then to look at that as going forward, an opportunity to weave like you said, a higher thread count of fabric in our lives. And I feel like I've seen that happening in this community in a very awesome and exciting way, because earlier you mentioned, what's the goal? Well, for me, I can picture a day where where not that the work like this would have to stop, but where we will have gotten so good at it that it's no longer an issue of contention. And I also do envision a day, I talked about this a little bit on the show too already, where the color of your skin and the color of my skin would be so uninteresting to people that they would just see us as the biological reality that we are just both two humans of the same species, and that our skin color is as uninteresting to each other as that I have brown hair and someone else has blonde hair, or that I'm short and they're tall, or whatever, and that humans have varying traits anyway, and that we have attached this significant importance to the skin pigmentation through all kinds of historical baggage that we've brought in the past, and that someday we will have evolved emotionally, mentally, evolved past that point. And maybe that's wishful thinking, but part of it is also just like, I can't picture 1,000 years from now people still talking about this stuff based on where we were 1,000 years ago to where we are now. And if you were just to keep thinking about that level of progression, I mean, think about the progress we've made in 50 years and 1,000 years. Are we still going to be sitting here talking about,
that's, you bring up, I think a beautiful image of what you just talked about. It's almost Martin Luther King-esque of this. I have a dream where we can see this sort of future, and I wonder if this is just like my personality of like, I'm like, yeah, we still gonna be talking about it, just because my grandparents and their parents, I could still. There's been years of struggle, and there's still ins and outs of really, really strong, heavy issues that affect the way I operate as a Black man. And so yeah, I would love for that to be where we go. I'd love for that to be, let's go there tomorrow. Like, let's make it happen.
Right.
But I don't know. And maybe this is like coming from an oppressed culture. Perhaps there's a different viewpoint of that. But I think if everyone had this mentality of, we've come so far, we have so far to go, let's dig in, or let's weave, if you will, then, I mean, that's beautiful. I would love for that to be where everyone is, as far as getting our, whatever this ish is,
right,
to be on a more resolved side. I also love the comment that you talked about within the United States culture of having this mecca of all different kinds of people and backgrounds, and because that's something that I brought to Battle High School. Being there it was one of the most diverse schools in our town. Majority just Black and white. We didn't have a whole lot of any cultures outside of those of that dichotomous. But and so this is going to go maybe down a different path, but as I celebrate public performance with Battle High School, I would honor, like, we don't look like anybody else, like, and especially like we had a competitive show choir. So in that show choir world, there's some issues there too, just like with everything else of costuming and outfitting and what people are supposed to wear and how they're supposed to look. And when you pay attention to that kind of thing, you can begin to wash out the personalities that are in the room or in the ensemble. And that's something that I always was excited about celebrating, is how different each person is on the stage, but how we're doing this thing together. And I always talked about how there was so much more, and I didn't know this. I didn't know I was going to come up with this sort of fabric thread count analogy thing. But that's what I really was getting at, is that we are so unique because we're so different, and because we honor those differences, that there is a power and a heft to what we can do when we perform on stage because of those backgrounds that other groups, I don't think, can bring to the table. And so that's something that we began to celebrate. And so thinking about our nation as a whole, like, we know the perception of what people think about America, or what we think about ourselves as Americans, can be a little big-headed. But there is something that can be really great about what we do, and there's already great things about what we do because we have so many different cultures and backgrounds. And so I to think about, with this vision, this Chris Month's I Have a Dream vision, that really does excite me to think like, what really could we do, and how strong can it be, and unchallenged by anybody else because of how diverse we are here as a country.
Yeah. The if you look globally at cultures, the reality is, and it's a sad reality, but the reality is that any culture that is relatively homogenous, I mean, just like almost everybody in that country looks the same and has the same religious and overarching religious and cultural background, those places tend to have lower rates of crime and other types of things. And it doesn't even matter what that skin color is or what that background is. It's homogeneity of because there's less things to argue about. If you're all raised with the same set of fundamental principles and guiding principles and all those things, but in the U.S. we are that melting pot idea where, okay, let's try this experiment where a whole bunch of people from lots of different places are going to come to a thing. There, from a psychological standpoint, it's going to cause arguments about stuff. About, we got to learn to live next to each other, all this kind of stuff. But the way I see that is, I see that as an opportunity because the planet can't stay segregated forever.
Right.
Technology won't allow that. Travel technology won't allow that. So in a lot of ways, the greatness of America that a lot of people talk about and see, I see that us as the potential for that too, but for different reasons than normal people, which is that I see that we could be this laboratory of experimentation, of cultural dialogue, that if we can figure it out here, we could potentially export that to the world, of ways that, and part of that laboratory means lots of failed experiments too. Lots of incorrect ways to look at it, lots of horrible things that from which we learn and we move forward and all of that. But I think there's something I want to circle back to something you said too, which I found very insightful, which was that when I talk about the future that I can envision, and you mentioned that there could be some difference of perspective coming from an oppressed culture versus not, and I think that's probably true in that when I make my wife angry, I can apologize. I'm ready to move on because I've apologized. That almost will always be she'll move on later, right?
Yeah.
And so that makes total sense to me. That would be. Although I have read quite a bit of philosophical scholarship from Black scholars too on that same topic that see it like I do. So I know that it can be done in that way. But you're probably right in that if I were to take a scientific poll of the Black population, there would probably be more that see it like you do. But I think the reason I still believe it as I try to extract myself as much as I possibly can, as much as is humanly possible, and zoom out at it. I look at other factors too, like the dramatic speed in this country at which biracial families are growing. Even just from a biological genetic standpoint. 1,000 years from now, will there even be a Black race that you, or in a white race that you could even?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. So I think his name is Tyrone Howard, and he sort of compiled this book called "All Students Must Thrive," and it's a series of articles and just compared with research and some writing, some essays that are in there too. And his is the first chapter. And he makes that case. He maintains that in 1,000 years, the amount of brown people walking in this country will be so much that they're like, we won't even understand sort of the differences between like all the different variants of color of people, because it'll just be there. And he cites, and there's a table in this article that cites big metropolitan areas and talks about what it was so many years ago to what it is now, and the percentage of people of color versus the percentage of people like of non. I think he uses non-color, or he doesn't use white, but he uses color and non-color.
Okay.
And so he uses that sort of thing to show.
Excuse me, we're peach.
Right, whatever. Crayola said so. And so he's talking about how it's already happening, and this is the excitement and the cool thing about these conversations is because we are starting to see this happen. And he said, 1,000 years from now, if it continues on this trend, then it'll be undeniable that race will look different in our country than it ever has before.
In the whole world.
Right.
Yeah. And like I said before, I think that our country will be, in a lot of ways, leading that charge because we are already more diverse. And the reality is most people, I think especially outside of the academic world and circles that teachers like you and I do move in, most people, when they encounter each other on the street or in church or in work, just see each other as people. Mm-hmm. Most people do. We are working on this equity in education kind of conversation, which, like I said before, towards the beginning of today's episode, where one of the biggest dangers I see in that work is that it does tempt us to look at the group first and the individual second. But I think outside of academia, most people don't process that way. They process like, hey, there's a girl and I find her attractive, and then, oh, she's white or whatever, or she's not, and so this idea of biracial and changing the genetic landscape of the country, I think I just see as a good thing, because I would love to envision a world where those types of things are as uninteresting as hair color or eye color or whatever, but I think you can envision that without having any relationship at all to the accusation that most people who see it like I do get, which is that you are somehow erasing the past or trying to downplay the significance of the past. And I just wholeheartedly reject that. You can do both. You can have both.
Right.
You can fully embrace the study of the history but to me, why do that? Why study the history at all if it's not so you can get to
something different
or better?
I think a lot of people look at life, and maybe money is the driver behind this, but a lot of people look at life as a meal, right? And a meal can only be made so big, and so if I invite 2 people over, then I get 1/3 of the meal. But if I invite 7 people over, then I only get 1/7 of the meal. And so people are looking at life like slices of pizza. And it's like, well, if they get pizza, then I'm not going to get to have that piece too. And I'm like, well, that's not really how life is built. Like, it's not built with this sort of like antiquated set limitation of resource.
The pizza is constantly changing size,
right? Yeah. And flavors, like people do pineapple and anchovy, and like it doesn't really matter. Like, you can have fish on your pizza. That's not how I roll. Yeah, but that's not changing my pizza,
right?
Like, so I don't understand. I've never looked at life in that way, and so when I engage in conversations with people that think that my spot at the table meant that someone else didn't get to sit there, I have a really hard time engaging in that conversation and saying, well, first of all, why am I not justified in having the spot? And second of all, there's an empty chair next to me. And I'm happy to welcome whomever you thought was supposed to be here to sit there. So I have it's tough to engage in that. And then that's when people's feeling gets hurt, or we're stubbing toes or whatever. But I also, we talked about this, engaging in different people and coming at it from grouping them off. I think the beautiful thing that I've seen in the literature about equity in education is not about, here are 5 things we can say to Black people to make them feel more comfortable in our class. Right. Like, we never get down to that, and that's what I feared as I began to sort of get a little bit more involved in talking about educational equity. I was like, I'm going to find a book about like how to teach Black people, and it's going to really piss me off.
That used to be a thing. I'm older than you, but
right. So we've started to talk about. We start Tier 1 education, and like, what does it mean to just have foundational practice that's great? We talk about universal design, of designing your curriculum and designing the culture in your classroom that gives everyone an opportunity to be heard. Or culturally relevant pedagogy. It has nothing to do with, this is how we teach brown people. This is how we teach humans, period. Yep. And so I'm like, okay, I'm glad that, the further I dig deep into this content, that I'm not finding like how to teach Asians book 101, how to teach Black people 101. And we're now at a place to where it's like, oh, we're seeing humans as humans, and this is how we can engage in humans in a holistic way. That probably should just be the good teaching that we should be doing anyway, but that we avoided because it is almost like an oral tradition of like, well, my teacher taught it to me this way, and they were taught by so-and-so that way. And so we're bringing this history of pedagogy within our practice, because that's a part of our experience and who we are. Nothing wrong with that, because there's probably some beauty in that either has driven you to be a teacher now, or you were so conflicted by it that you're like, I'm never doing it that way. And so that also may have brought you to this point of being a teacher too. But we can't work with that alone. We have to make sure that we're adding in these different experiences, these different perspectives. And so I think through Tier 1 education and culturally relevant pedagogy, and like actually talking about what education does with the brain and connecting that research to what we do and practice in our space, I think that'll help us be a lot better at what we do.
Right.
Because as you said, the U.S. could be a lab experience, but our classrooms, I think, are lab experiences every single day. And so it's like, all right, here's something, I'm throwing it out. We're trying to see what it does. If it catches, great. If it doesn't, nope, let's continue to develop and grow. And so why aren't we doing that with culturally relevant strategies? And why aren't we doing that with meeting the needs equitably across our classroom? That should be the stuff that we're dumping into our teaching practice.
Yeah, that's great. I'm actually about to make the most bizarre analogy that I think I've ever made on the show, based on what you just said. Because I'm going to make the analogy of what you just said of Tier 1 and culturally relevant stuff that you feel like is really getting at teaching people to be or as humans, right? To the episode that I did on intonation. I know. Go with me. Stick with me.
I'm here.
So Don Brenniger and I talked about, in episode 28, we talked about tuning systems and how tuning systems are different in every culture on different instruments and all over the world. And there's all kinds of correct ways to tune stuff. And we get used to the way we are used to hearing it, largely in the Western world around well-tempered piano tuning, right? And so we had come to the agreement, as we were discussing in that episode, that in a choral classroom, we are best served with essentially a cappella rehearsing, where we are using just intonation, where they are listening to the overtones that are created by nature, the fundamental natural elements of sound, because it causes the students to listen to such a degree that if we decide to collaborate at some point with a mariachi band that tunes differently, they will already be in the habit of just listening all the time. And then that instrument comes in that's tuned a little bit differently, and they're already listening and adjusting. So the analogy to this is that, no, you don't need to have a lesson today on, okay, today, kids, the analogy in a choir classroom has always been one that's funny to me. All right, kids, we're going to do a song from Africa. And then I make contact with eye contact with the black kids. Hey, this is for you, buddy. No, of course we wouldn't do that. That would be so condescending. And I'm cringing just thinking about that. Like, what if that's what we thought was being culturally inclusive, was to, oh, this song's in Spanish, looking at you, kid from Puerto Rico. We wouldn't ever do that. And that would be so dumb. But if we're crafting...
I might pause you and say that people do that. I think people do.
Really?
Maybe not with like the this is for you, but I think there's some conversations where it's like, well, I need something for my fill in the blank kids, and I'm like,
yes.
What do you mean?
Okay, that bothers me.
What do you mean?
Yeah.
Say more. That's always my response, because it's like, okay, I'm going to talk to a black choir teacher. Can you give me something fun? And people's bodies do weird things, and they move in ways that I've never seen them move when they talk to me. And I'm just like,
are you having a seizure?
Say more. Say more. Who are you trying to reach? And they won't say the term black, and they won't say age. They won't label it. But I'm like, I know that's what they're trying to get at. Is like, I want something fun to like get at my one black kid. I want to be able to give that kid something. And I'm like, just be an amazing teacher with great foundational pedagogy, and then have literature that you teach through that can sing and to live with everyone. I was like, don't feel like you need to pick out a black piece for your black kid, because then you're further alienating them away from this experience.
You're othering them in a well-intentioned way.
Yeah.
But it's putting that kid in a box that he's already probably feeling like he's in a box if he's the only black kid in the choir or whatever.
Yeah. Chris, I can't tell you how many times someone has like Facebook messaged me or texted me or called me, and all in great intention. But it's like, what do you think about this spiritual? Like, can my choir of white people say de on soon I will be done. Are we supposed to, can we say that language? And then my response always back is like, first of all, thank you for reaching out and doing some research. I think your research is a little ill-placed. It needs to be put in books and into the history. I was like, but thank you for trusting me with that. I was like, here's some suggestions that I have, but then also here are books that you can read, or here is like the composer or arranger's life story. Like, how can you connect that? Like, what we would do with any other piece of music, we should be doing with what we have, like, unfortunately categorized as multicultural music. Like, I don't consider myself multicultural. Like, why? Like, I was born here. Like, I'm not from a different place. So why is Black music, which is some of the only original American music, like, why is that considered multicultural? Like, I don't understand these labels that we begin to put on things. But I have encountered so many people that are like, okay, you're the resident professional on this because of how you look. And I'm like, I do just as much research in gospels and spirituals as I do with Bach and Beethoven or anybody else. I was like, and I'm going to challenge you to do this exact same thing. Like, pick up a book. Go learn your stuff.
Well, yeah, okay, so that's a really good point. I'm thinking one of the first things that pops to my mind would be culturally specific musical, culturally specific musical elements, or even diction elements that occur in all music from everywhere. So, okay, my master's thesis was on mostly French Baroque performance practice. So there were ornamentations that were very specific to that time, that if I were to do an edition for a choir to perform, I could write it so that it would sound very authentic at the time, and I could give instructions. I can't imagine a white conductor, or any conductor, sending me a Facebook message saying, well, we're not French, so is it okay for us to do this ornamentation? And I'd be like, that's why I put it in the arrangement, because that's the point. Yeah. And yet, that's an amazing observation, because you're right. With music, with Black music, for some reason we've created new rules.
It's such a discomfort.
Why would the arranger have put DE instead of THE? Well, because he's trying to get it to sound as authentic as he can to the style at the time, like every other musicologist is trying to do.
Right.
What makes you so special?
Or if we talk about, and this is what, if you sit and think about it for a moment, I think we as educated educators could have come up with some of these thoughts. But it's like, I've walked into some rehearsals where I'm clinicking, let's say maybe like a Moses Hogan, like big 18,000 part gospel score. And like, this is definitely acculturated music. It's meant to sound authentic in some ways. But it's like, no, this is like, imagine yourself as, someone who's working hard in the fields, and you're working. I'm just like, I'm sorry, I wasn't there. I wasn't in that time, but I don't imagine that we had fields of slaves singing in 16-part Debussy in the field. I just don't think so. Like, why are we bringing up this imagery with this acculturated gospel piece? It's because we just haven't done the work to dig past the surface. And all we've done is say, all right, here's this cool piece. I'm scared of it. I don't have any Black friends, or I may talk to my one Black friend and try to figure that out. I'm like, it has the same amount of cultural depth as any other piece, and the same amount of research to be uncovered and discovered as any other piece. We just have to engage in it in a way that says, how can I honor this music as I teach it, instead of moving through and like walking on eggshells around the issues that are within that piece. I'm just like, we got to get to a time to where it's music.
Yeah.
Like, how to study a score. Study the score.
Right. Well, I'm going to take this back also to the analogy that I made with when I piss my wife off and say I'm sorry, because I agree with you that we shouldn't do that, and we shouldn't walk on eggshells. But I also think there's a certain natural progression that we are still going through as a country and as a culture with baggage around Black and white specific issues that aren't there with even Black and Asian, or Black or white and Mexican, or there are some specific Black-white dynamics in this country that are touchy, and because I think it's well intentioned. Like, I'm doing these conversations now with this show because I think it's so important to just address the elephants in the room in a way that hopefully, if this show contributes anything to the dialogue, it would be that, oh, you know what, maybe we can just talk about it. Like, maybe we can just talk about it. Like, you're a person and I'm a person. But the analogy would be that I pissed my wife off. I said, I'm sorry. She hasn't moved on yet. So until she does, I'm walking on eggshells, right? I'm gonna be really careful with what I say.
Mm-hmm.
There's going to be that period where, like, I know that we're going to be okay, but that I'm just going to tread lightly for just a day or two or whatever, do a little extra cleaning up around the house, or whatever, until I feel like that's washed water under the bridge. So I think there is zoom that out to an entire society where we are still, there are probably a significant number of white conductors and teachers that, if that baggage wasn't there, they might just say, this is music like any other music, and I'm going to try to figure out how to pronounce it and articulate it and blah, 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 and they would look at it. But that baggage overlays on top of their looking at it. I don't really feel that way, partly because I've made myself engage in conversations like this one. But for a lot of teachers, I've used this example before too. There are still lots of places in this country where a white choir teacher is working in a classroom with all white kids, and there is not another black person to ask or talk to outside of Facebook, anywhere nearby them. And so they haven't had these conversations. They haven't sat down on a human level with somebody. And I can see, like, I'd rather them not walk on eggshells like that, but I can see why they do.
Okay.
Does that?
Yeah, I hear that.
Yeah.
I hear that for sure. Yeah, that reminds me, and this maybe has nothing to do with it, but so I'm in a multi-racial relationship. So my wife is white, she identifies as white, I'm black. So we have multiracial children. But when you first meet the family, I have 3 nephews and a niece, and for, I think, the youngest of the 3, maybe the 3 youngest, I may have been the first black person that they had ever seen. And so I'm looking at a 3-year-old child or a 2-year-old child or a newborn, and their eyes are literally coming out of their head trying to understand, like, what is this dark mass that's, like, holding me and looking at me and communicating with me. And so I think of those communities much like Moberly, where I was one of just a few, and I know there are communities that are even more homogenous. And I wonder, like, do we be intentional about, and this is why I love clinicking and working with your, like, run-of-the-mill conference choir experience, like, because I know what I can bring can be so much more enriching than having an amazing performance at the end. And so I'm going into these sort of towns where I've taken, County Road 272, and I've made my way to Northwest Regional High School in the middle of nowhere, Missouri, and I am the only black person there. And I've come to a place in my life where my parents have taught me enough about how to operate in a place of whiteness to be successful, but then also at a place to where I know that there's so much that I can offer, and this experience, just by me being a black person working with a room full of white people, can bring, that I lean right into that. And so I wonder for communities that lack that experience, it comes back to that thread count thing. Like, how can we all begin to engage in a conversation where we're weaving those lives together to create that lab experience, to get that more enriched culture, no matter where we are.
Yeah, I think those isolations are, like I said, in my optimism, that I can see them already are less and less than they were when I was in high school. Or even you go back another generation to my dad, who was raised in the 60s in South Dakota, where the first black person he saw was when he went to college on the basketball team with him, ever in his life. And, so those are that homogeneity is already going away, and it's just a slow process. And of course, none of these things get solved in any one person's lifetime. So that I think that causes us, when we look at them, we tend to look at the span of time that is in our view. And so one of the things I try to do with everything that I analyze is to try to zoom out as much as I possibly can and look at what was it like 1,000 years ago? What could it be like 2,000 years ago. And then if I'm feeling really nervous, or well, I don't mean nervous, nerdy is what I meant to say, then I'll remind myself how flash in the pan 2,000 years is in the grand scheme of everything.
Yep.
But that's a different podcast. But yeah, so I'm gonna I think wrap this up with another just kind of story or reflection and see what you think about it. And then we said, man, I promised people a choir podcast. But this one really wasn't. That's okay. This is important. Yeah. I think an important conversation. Are you familiar with an author named Thomas Chatterton Williams? Okay, so he recently released a book, which I think you might find very interesting because of your biracial and multiracial family and children. Because he is a man who had a black father and a white mother. But was raised to with kind of, in his words, what he now sees as kind of an antiquated way of looking at race that comes out of like the Jim Crow South and the whole thing, where even if you're a little bit black, you are black. Yep. Right. And he was
the one drop mentality.
Yep. Yes, the one drop thing, and he was taught that by his dad, and that's how you're going to be seen by other people. So that's how you have to behave and whatever. And he was raised with that idea. And then he got married and had to a white woman and had kids that looked even less black than him. And he said he just over a few years just had this kind of whole worldview come crashing down around him when he looked at his blue-eyed daughter and thought, like, the world is not going to see her as anything that other than a blue-eyed pretty girl or whatever, yet she's my child. Mm-hmm. And so at what point does her race looking different than my race matter? Because of how much I love her, and she's, all this, it's very touching. And he goes into kind of telling stories about his childhood and his the things he was raised to believe about race, and that's why he calls it unlearning race, just because he like trying to take his mind out of the boxes that he's been taught and just be more of like this, human, and now he lives in Paris. And so it's like they have completely different racial baggage. They look at everything differently over there. And so being raised in the U.S. with that mentality and then going over there and all these experiences, I found it fascinating to read. So I wonder if, in the context of your own kids, mm-hmm. What do you, what are your dreams for them as kids to grow up in the U.S.? They're going to get educated, probably in a public school, I'm guessing, and how you would want them to be perceived both humanly and with their race.
Yeah, I think the answer is complicated. Mm-hmm. I think there is some simplified beauty in where they are right now. Yeah. So they're in an in-home daycare where, like, they are multiracial. So the world will see them as black just because of their complexion. Well, maybe not Berkeley. I don't know. And so these are dialogues and conversations that I have with Tara all the time about, like, okay, like, do we teach them all these things that I learned as a black man growing up because the world was going to see me as black, and that's what they also need to know because the world may also see them as black, and will we need that at the time that they're old enough? But to get back to answer the question, I'm zooming into how I see them operate and function just as toddlers in this in-home daycare situation, and how beautiful that is. In the most simple of ways, is because they just operate as people, and the other children at this care facility don't necessarily see my children as black or anything else. They just see them as Brenlin, and they see her as Berkeley. Right. And I would love for them to grow up in that same sort of safe haven, sort of in that simple way. That I guess that's my true desire for mm-hmm. them, is for the world to just be like that right now. And so what they're experiencing at this early stage of childhood would continue to just blossom and grow as more layers of people are folded in to their lives. Mm-hmm.
So seeing those differences is a learned behavior. Right. It's a culturally instilled thing. I remember Clara Watts, my daughter, when she was 3 or 4, made in a sandbox in the neighborhood, made friends with a little black girl, and she came home and she was so excited about it, and she was telling me. And so my first question was, "So what did you like about her that makes you her friend?" And her first instinct popped right out of her head. Well, she wears braids just like me.
Yeah.
Her instinct is to find and I think it's a human instinct, is to find the similarities that connect us before we find the differences. And then some point later, someone, teaches us that the differences are more important.
Right. So it's what we do with those associations. Like Brinlin knows, and Berkeley does too, because she can see, but she can't yet articulate. But Brinlin at about 2.5 was like, well, Daddy's brown and I'm brown, but Mommy and Berkeley are pink. And we're like,
peach.
Yeah. And so pink's her favorite color.
Right.
So if it can be pink, it's got to be pink. And so then we went into this shock, because we oftentimes forget that that we're not the same color Tara and I do.
Right.
And so it's like, okay, now what do we do? So we put the kids to bed, we go back to our bedroom, we're like, okay, so what do we do with this? And I think we just leave it as it is right now. She's noticing differences. I was like, but if we begin to define those differences and label and categorize and set us apart from one another, I was like, then we begin to sort of break down the innocence of that observation. I was like, so I think we cannot start right now associating color with all the things that are happening in society.
Right.
But I also don't want them to grow up being caught off guard
or uneducated. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So it's a fine balance, and I think I would hope like if my children both came out of the womb looking non-black or like would look white, that I would still want to educate them in some way in a multicultural way of like, this is how life can operate for people that may not look like you.
It's still your family heritage too.
So and this is, So, and then an add to that is Tara and I both struggle with people asking if there are children. So it's like, so like Tara will be at the grocery store with two multiracial kids in her, and it's like, oh, are these your nieces? And she's like, no, these are my daughters. Like, they both belong to me. They both came from me. They're of me. And oftentimes I'll get asked like, oh, so are you babysitting or taking care of, someone's kids? And I'm like, these are my kids. Like they belong to us, or they are a part of who we are. But I think, I don't know. I think the more that we, like we said, with Tyrone Howard's thoughts and his work on just more brownness being around our country, those conversations hopefully will grow with their lifespan and time, become less and less of a, wow, we're noticing these differences, and do these two things belong together?
I think with your kids, the approach sounds like it makes a lot of sense to me. I think it kind of goes back to a similar approach to what I mentioned earlier, where you can teach someone about the history of a thing. And in our country, with our racial history, I think that is an imperative. We have to continue to teach that and tell those stories, and to teach it to all of us as if it's American history, right? But how we choose to interpret that for how we move forward from it, though, is very much a choice. And I think, unfortunately, there is a strong contingent of academics that want to teach that history to weaponize it for now, to make certain people feel guilty about that, which, in my opinion, I'm on the record already on the show saying this. I think that's why Trump won. I think that they're because of that approach. But so instead, I feel like with your kids, if you're teaching them that they're at some point when they're old enough, like you said, you'll be able to teach them certain things about the history that is your history, but also their family history that's important for them to know. But it doesn't mean you have to teach them to be afraid of the world. Right. You can do both. Like, you can teach them to say, this is an important part of our history, but here's how we're going to move forward from it as a family, that kind of thing. And that's, I feel like if we get equity in the classroom right, that's going to be huge in that way. If we can, and if that's what, in my opinion, that's what right would mean. Yeah. Is that we're teaching the history, we're telling the stories with the mentality of, and we move forward together, then we can put it behind us.
I think that work I think is different. I think there's two different types of work to be done. I think there's an internalized oppression that people that come from a culture of oppression live and exist in.
Okay.
And that's how they operate out of that. So that's fear of the man,
Right.
But then there's also on the other side of the table just a lack of multicultural education. And so there needs to be a cultural fusion for those individuals, and then there needs to be sort of some release of that fear and that anger on the other side as we, and this is the equity work that we've been working with in our area, is we just talk about dismantling this table of racism or this table of injustice. And there are different legs of this table visually, and there's legs over here that need to be taken care of differently. They were constructed differently, and therefore they have to be taken down differently. And so looking at that work, I think, is super complex.
Yeah.
And that's really kind of got me lit on fire to I need to keep on reading and keep on learning, because I'm learning things about myself and my past and connecting those with okay, this is what I can do to move forward, or this is how my wife can move forward, in us as a multiracial couple, how we can move forward and operate for other people to continue to weave that thread count in to enrich others' lives as well as our own.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So let's finish this way, Jazz. What's something that on this topic, or really any topic, that you feel you'd just like to say that you don't feel like I gave you a chance to say?
I don't know. I think if I'm to be an activist, I just want everyone to agree to go. Whatever that is for you, take that first step. If that's reaching across and asking someone who doesn't look like you a question that's been on your mind for a long time, take that risk. Or if that's, for me, instead of hearing that microaggression happen one more time, stopping that conversation and saying, actually, I prefer this instead, or whatever that is. I would just want everyone to take that step and go on that journey and realize that whatever path you take, the courageous nature that you have about you for being able to dare yourself to take that step, I think that's what I want people to know, is to just get started. I don't know where I am on this journey, but I really do feel like I've started. And sometimes I think I've taken the wrong path and got upset about some things that I've said and done in the classroom. That's not the way I wanted to go down. But be courageous and do take that step.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for doing this. This was a very, very good conversation.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thanks a lot.
Let's talk again.
Yeah.
Thank you, as always, for sticking around to the end of an episode. If you're still listening, that must mean that you enjoyed something about what you heard, or you are enjoying your self-punishment, one or the other. But if you do enjoy and get something out of these episodes, there are some really important things that I need your help with. And one of those is getting the word out about the show. So anytime you hear something that you enjoy or that you find that resonates with you and you think other choral directors and choral folk might enjoy, consider sharing an episode. There's also the Choralosopher's Facebook page. There is the Choralosophy Patreon page, where you can take the conversation more in depth in a private forum, as well as getting extra content. For as little as $3 a month, you can go over to patreon.com/Choralosophy. And last but not least, it is very, very helpful that you reach out and let our sponsors know that you're listening by using the promo code Choralosophy at all 4 of our sponsor websites when you're looking for some awesome products for your classroom. Of course, that is vocevista.com/Choralosophy. You get a free trial for 30 days of that software, which is an awesome deal. Then you get 10% off if you choose to purchase it. Plus, SightReadingFactory.com, you get 10% off there of all your memberships for your students, as well as GraphitePublishing.com on sheet music and RyanMain.com on sheet music. So check all of those out and keep listening and keep the conversation going. Thank you so much. See you next time.